Mecha is one of the oldest and most storied genres in all of anime. Rooting back all the way to the beginning of the medium, mecha has stuck around to this day, getting more and more popular with each year. The concept of manned robots is a very old one, with some examples of it existing even back in the late 40s and early 50s. It took a bit longer, however, for the concept of mecha as we know it today to really take off. For those of you who don't know, mecha refers to robots controlled from a cockpit within the robot itself as opposed to remote control. Shows like Mazinger Z and Gundam led the charge, and some of the most legendary anime out there, like Neon Genesis Evangelion and Code Geass, are mecha anime. And not to ruffle up feathers, but I would argue that there's one other extremely popular show that's basically a mecha show. That's right, Attack on Titan. Now, before you get all angry in the comments typing all sort of profanities at me, you gotta hear me out for a second. Titan shifters are basically just like mechas, where you control a large, robot-like being from the inside. But regardless of where you stand on the debate, whether you consider Attack on Titan to be a mecha, a flash mecha, or not one at all, still have to admit that the author took huge inspirations from the genres when designing the Titans. But while the shows themselves are very popular in their own right, they're not where the actual money is made. A huge appeal of mecha are the toys, and especially the model kits with which you can build your own mechas. Gundam especially is on the forefront of this, leading to it being in the top 5 highest grossing anime franchises of all time. Now, with all that being said, there's something I have to admit. For the longest time, I was not the biggest fan of the genre. Naturally, there are some shows that are so iconic, they're basically a must-watch if you want to get deeper into the anime fandom. But besides Neon Genesis Evangelion and Code Geass, I've never really sought out any mechas. It was just something about the concept of these giant robots that didn't really appeal to me for some reason. But then I heard whispers about one particular show, Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann. Several friends whose taste in anime I really trust heavily urged me to watch the show, despite knowing my opinions about the genre. And so, after heavy deliberation, I finally got around to watching the show. And when I say it didn't disappoint, I mean it. Featuring some fantastic characters, a gorgeous art style, and animations that hold up even 17 years after the original show aired, it blew me away. What impressed me most was the story and the message behind that well-crafted narrative. Because while the action surely took the spotlight in many people's eyes, mine included at the beginning, Gurren Lagann's story about overcoming humanity's limits is inspiring, to say the least. In short, the story of Gurren Lagann can be divided into two portions. It takes place in a distant future where the so-called Spiral King, Lord Genome, has forced humanity to live in isolated caves, killing anyone and everyone who dares to set foot on the surface. He does this with the help of his underlings, the Beastmen, who use mechanical robots called gunmen to do his bidding. Using a core drill they found in the ground and piloting an orderly gunman named Lagann, the two main characters Simon and Kamina escape with the help of the sharpshooter Yoko. After another dangerous encounter with some gunmen, where Kamina hijacks one of the gunmen, calling it Gurren, these three, together with their mechanic Liron, set out on a journey to free humans of their oppression. On the way, they fight battle after battle, just some gunfodder enemies to the Beastmen's 4 generals. Over the course of their journey, they inspire hundreds of people to join them. One of the most important being Rossiu, who provides a more logical perspective to the more hot-headed trio of Kamina, Simon, and Yoko. Even the enemy isn't entirely immune to their charms, as even Lord Genome's daughter, Nia, the crew, or brigade, as they call it. In the end, they defeat Lord Genome. Weirdly enough, possesses something closely resembling their Gurren Lagann. But unfortunately, not all of the members make it through their battles alive, with Kamina dying a heroic death. Now, that's where most would assume the series ends. The big bad has been defeated, humanity is free, and everything should be good. But Lord Genome's final words, as well as the fact that 12 episodes of the show still remain, make it clear that the show is far from over. We check back in with the characters after 7 years. Except for Yoko, who decided she wasn't the right person for it, everyone from the main crew was a position in a newly formed government, with Simon being the supreme leader and Rossio being his chief advisor. But while humanity enjoys prosperity like they haven't in a long time, with very rapid scientific advancements to boot, one thing seems to bother the Gurren Brigade. When the land comes to overflow with 1 million apes, the moon shall become Hell's messenger to destroy the world of the spiral. Where the final words of Lord Genome could just be written off as the ramblings of a dead man, a bit of doubt still lingered, and as the population of humanity was approaching 1 million, it was only logical to send a probe to the moon to investigate if what he said was true. But they weren't quick enough. Using Nia, an alien race called the Anti-Spirals, make their appearance. They sent the moon on a collision course with Earth in order to eradicate all life on it, as they deem any race with the power of the spiral, Simon's drill that powers Gurren Lagann, to be a threat to the universe itself. This information causes mass unrest among the citizens, and Rossio only sees one option to resolve this: use Simon as a scapegoat to calm the masses. He's thrown in prison and sentenced to death, something Rossio is shown to deeply regret. He then forms a plan. The former flagship of Lord Genome, Tepelin, get a part of the population off the planet while the rest hides underground to survive the collision. But when Liron reveals that the collision of the moon and Earth would result in all people still left on Earth dying, he makes a heartbreaking decision to leave those people behind. In a last-ditch effort, he's convinced to give Simon his core drill back. Simon uses this to prevent the collision of the moon and then fights the Anti-Spiral in a one-on-one gunman battle. He defeats them, but Nia unfortunately vanishes afterwards, as her existence is tied to the Anti-Spirals. The most prominent narrative thread, the one that spans the entire series from the beginning all the way to the end of it, is the relationship between Kamina and Simon. The relationship defined the entire show, and although Kamina died not even halfway through it, his influence on the entire cast, and especially Simon, remains noticeable throughout the rest of the series runtime. For the first 10 episodes, Kamina is very much the driving force behind the Gurren Brigade. So much so, in fact, that many people, myself included, thought he was actually the protagonist for a good bit. On the surface, Kamina is hot-headed and arrogant, which is perfectly shown by his catchphrase, "Who the hell do you think I am?" He's the definition of an idealist, who doesn't stop in the face of common sense and logic. He does whatever he thinks is the right thing to do, and it usually works out. And most importantly, he is the glue that holds the Gurren Brigade together. He's incredibly charismatic. Despite his seemingly moronic actions, he's a smart leader on the battlefield, devoted to protecting the people he cares about. But although Kamina is often seen as the main driving force behind the brigade, especially in the beginning, he himself admits that Simon is required to turn his ambitions into reality. In a way, these two make the perfect team. Personality-wise, Simon is pretty much the opposite of Kamina, especially at the start of the story. He's a shy, meek boy, also being dragged along by his partner's antics and carving a way for himself. He also keeps a cool head in situations which Kamina would want to rush in head first. While it is blatantly obvious that Simon admires Kamina, both for his go-get-it attitude and just generally for the impact he had in his life, that admiration goes both ways. In a flashback, it's revealed that both of them were trapped underground after an earthquake with no feasible way out. While Kamina did what he does best, keep the morale up, it is Simon who actually solved the problem. He never gave up, tirelessly drilling through the rocks to get them out of the cave. Then on, Kamina vowed to emulate Simon's grit and determination, never showing fear, no matter how scared he actually was. In short, both of them hugely benefited from being around the other. They were so inseparable, so important to each other, you couldn't really get one without getting the other too. That's why Kamina's death was all the more tragic. Naturally, everyone in the Gurren Brigade mourned his death. Kamina was the leader, and the main reason why all of them banded together in the first place. But Simon was definitely the one it hit the hardest. He fell into a state of depression for a good while. No one on their team was really able to help him. In a time where the brigade needed him the most, he folded. The team started doubting his capabilities in even being a leader in the first place, and after a while, command of the brigade went over to Kitan, someone closely resembling Kamina in attitude and temper instead. However, without Kamina and with Simon, whose emotional turmoil prevents him from actually piloting Gurren, the team was no match for one of the 4 generals. They suffered a swift defeat. Trapped in a prison with seemingly no way out, this seemed to be the end of the human resistance. But that's when Simon showed that Kamina's trust in him wasn't misplaced. Everyone else gave up. He was the one who persevered. He kept digging and digging until his hands blistered just so he could lead everyone to freedom. But the one who gave him the motivation to do just that wasn't Yoko. It wasn't Kamina either, really. In fact, it wasn't anyone who was originally part of the Gurren Brigade. Every one of them was so deeply saddened by Kamina's passing that they couldn't help Simon. The one who dragged him out of the hole he was in, metaphorically speaking, was Nia. She was the newest arrival to the crew, and she didn't even know who Kamina was. But that's exactly what happened. She wasn't saddened with grief, burdened with what happened in the past. She was the only person to appreciate Simon only for himself, without thinking about Kamina in the meantime. Nia told him that he shouldn't be so reliant on Kamina. He himself was an amazing person, that he shouldn't try to emulate others, instead focusing on being his own person. Following this, and especially after the 7-year time skip, Simon really became his own person. Gone was the shy, meek boy of old. But he didn't forget Kamina, not in the slightest. His influence was there the entire time. While he didn't try to emulate Kamina, traces of his personality can still be seen, as the bravado and leadership capabilities Simon exhibited in the final fight were certainly influenced by him. But while Simon and Kamina are certainly the most important characters in the series, one other person really needs to be talked about. One that I have not mentioned a lot thus far. A character that, while seemingly being just another member of the brigade, really shows what the series was trying to say. I am, of course, talking about Rossio. Rossio gets introduced in episode 5 of the show. He's from a village which worships gunmen as gods and sees the surface as God's land. The village he lived in was barren, so the village chief saw only one solution: limiting the number of people allowed to live in the village to 50, exiling people whenever the population would cross that boundary. When the birth of twins during Gurren Brigade's visit to the village would cause 2 young kids to be exiled, Rossio volunteers himself to join them on a journey to the surface. Initially, Rossio isn't a big fan of how Simon and Kamina deal with their problems. He disapproves of their impulsive actions and wishes they cared more about the way they conducted themselves. But with time, he grows into one of the brigade's most valuable members. But after the final battle in part 1 is where he really comes alive. As opposed to Simon and Kamina, his natural habitat isn't the battlefield. No, logistics and bureaucratics are things that feel like a much more natural environment for him. Although Simon technically holds the position of Supreme Commander due to being the hero that saved humanity. It is Rossio who actually enables the government to run as smoothly as it does. 7 years after their defeat of Lord Genome, Rossio developed some unsavory feelings towards the other members in the government, Simon especially. Rossio felt he wasn't really taking his job as seriously as he should. However, but he was disappointed. There was nothing he could really do. Simon was the hero who saved the world, and while there were some problems, they weren't big enough to actually majorly impact public's opinion of him. That changed, however, with the attack of the anti-spirals. Rossio wanted to wait with a response. After all, these were completely new opponents that they had never encountered before. But Simon didn't really like that idea. The citizens' lives were in danger, and he just couldn't stand by and wait. He destroyed the anti-spiral robots. These were designed to disperse into hundreds of explosive pieces upon death, causing untold amounts of destruction in the city. Additionally, Simon's conversation with Nia, who was now acting as a messenger for the anti-spirals, was broadcast to the public. This meant they all found out that the moon was heading towards Earth and that Earth, in turn, was heading towards destruction. Rossio only saw one way to appease the angry masses: assume power for himself, imprison Simon, and sentence him to death. Now, to the viewers, Rossio would naturally come across as the villain in the story. While Simon's actions weren't perfect, he still tried to help the people. He is the hero of our story, and so it makes sense for us to root for him. However, there is some merit to Rossio's actions. Looking at it logically, his plan was the one that had the highest chance of ensuring humanity's survival, even if it meant a large part of the population had to die. In a way, his actions mirrored what happened in his home village in episode 5, with him behaving exactly like the village chief back then. Although pained by the decisions, he decided to sacrifice people for the greater good. But in both cases, against all odds, Simon and his crew come together and rescue these people. And in a way, this rescue, in effect, the whole conflict of Simon versus Rossio, represents the most fundamental themes of Gurren Lagann. And I have to admit, I even feel bad for Rossio. In any other world, he would probably be lauded as a tragic hero. Here, however, he's almost a villain. This is because the Gurren Brigade is very good at one thing: defying the odds. In fact, those 3 words can be used to accurately describe the main theme of the show. Simon's whole journey is about defying the odds at all times. One quote really sat with me on my watch through of the show: "Theoretical calculations are pointless when you are concerned." The Gurren Lagann Brigade, time after time, managed to overcome seemingly impossible odds, defeated enemies that they had no business beating, getting out of situations that had seemed like dead ends. They proved that the anti-spirals had every right to be afraid of them. In the story, this is largely due to the spiral power, but I think this represented something bigger. It showed that human adaptability is limitless. It showed that if we put our minds to it, the sky's the limit in regards to what we as a species can achieve. This show isn't actually about the fighting, although it is a phenomenal aspect of it. In my opinion, the show is about the potential of humanity. It's an aspiring tale of humanity who could rise up even under the worst of circumstances. Many other mecha anime have a larger focus on the political aspect, to show us that war often isn't as white and black as many think, with there not being a clear good and bad side. Gurren Lagann, however, takes the genre in a completely different direction. The way it deconstructs the human experience is magnificent. I would recommend the show to anyone, regardless of if they like the genre or not.
行くぞ最後の戦いだ